In the state of Oklahoma, we're at a crisis state with addiction, and the opioid addiction took this to a whole new level. We are at the top of the list in the number of people who are dying by opioid overdose, and we were at the top of the list for the number of people who were being prescribed and the number of prescriptions we had available and pills in our community.
The United States has never experienced a drug addiction epidemic like the one we're experiencing today. So how did we get here? And the reason we've seen a sharp increase in the number of Americans suffering from this life-threatening condition is because the medical community began to prescribe opioids very aggressively. Starting in the 1990s, prescriptions for opioids began rising rapidly.
There was a big push in medicine overall to start treating pain. They called it pain was the fifth vital sign. The other vital signs would be blood pressure, which we have a number for, heart rate, which we have a number for, your respiratory rate, and your oxygen saturation. And then here is this fifth vital sign, and the number we associate that is what the patient tells us. Okay, so that's very subjective.
And when you have conversations with your patients where you're saying, I'm now gonna ask you about your pain, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least amount of pain, 10 being the highest amount of pain. Before I even let you speak, I've planted the word pain in your mind several times.
So if you were at a number 1, then you'd have a smile on your face because I'm not hurting, and that's okay. And if you were at a number 10, you'd be in extreme distress. And essentially, if you were above middle, like a 5 to 6 facial expression or number, if you were above that, your doctors were supposed to, by the guidelines, they were supposed to prescribe opiate pain medication. So doctors were told you'd get in trouble, you could get sued, and you would lose money if you don't start treating pain. And so doctors were taught this, we felt like we had to, and so if you look at the number of prescriptions written, it skyrocketed about 15 years ago. Also at the same time that overdoses skyrocketed. So we know that there's a strong correlation between overdose death and opioid prescribing. At the same time, the pharmaceutical companies were saying that these medicines are not as addictive as what you thought because they're long-acting. That error of the pain is the fifth vital sign is definitely a crucial part of the story because that's when a lot of this started.
As a doctor, if you have a patient who's suffering, they're experiencing pain, you want to help them and you want to be compassionate and relieve their suffering. And opioids can do that. They will do that in the short run. In fact, it was good intentions that played a really important role here. We were trying to help people, and the reason that we started to use opioids for conditions where we never would have prescribed them in the past is because we were responding to a brilliant, multifaceted marketing campaign that was disguised as education.
There's no question that our best, strongest pain medicines are the opioids. They don't wear out, they go on working, they do not have serious medical side effects. In fact, the rate of addiction amongst pain patients who are treated by doctors is much less than 1%. And so these drugs, which I repeat are our best, strongest pain medications, should be used much more than they are for patients in pain.
I got my life back now. Now I can enjoy every day that I live. I can really enjoy myself. And before, even a good day was hell.
Doctors were wrong in thinking that opioids can't be used long term. They can be and they should be. We used to think they'd stop working or the patients would become addicts. These 6 cases show how wrong those views were. What do we learn from these 6 patients? Most importantly, they refute the myth that long-term opioid use would inevitably lead to addiction, tolerance, and passivity. It's not acceptable to say I don't believe in using strong pain medications for chronic pain. We need to stop saying this.
You're being told that they're not addicting or not as addicting, and you don't have to worry about that. Also, you're being told that you're a bad person and you're a bad doctor, you're violating your ethics, you're violating the law if you're not prescribing these medications. Shame on you, doctor.
Doctors were sold a bill of goods saying that these were not addictive. If you don't think you're doing any harm, then what is the reason for not giving them? We didn't realize how addicting these were because the pharmaceutical companies told their reps to instruct physicians these weren't addictive. They could give them and they didn't have to worry about patients becoming addicted to it. So they were given for every minor pain.
We would have been much less gullible if we were hearing this just from the sales reps for the drug companies. We were hearing this from our professional societies. We were hearing it from our hospitals. We were hearing it from our state medical boards. From every different direction, you were hearing that if you're an enlightened doctor, you'll be different from those puritanical doctors of the past. Turns out that these different organizations and some of the pain specialists eminent in the field of pain medicine who were promoting these messages had financial ties with opioid manufacturers. The reason they launched this campaign of misinformation about opioids, the reason they deceived the medical community is they wanted a drug that would perform well financially. OxyContin, extended release oxycodone, is a good drug if you're treating pain at the end of life from cancer. But a drug company isn't going to do well financially if their product is only given to people at the end of life with cancer. That's not a common condition, and the patients won't be on your drug for very long if they're at the end of life. The way you do well with a pharmaceutical product is if you can get the medical community to prescribe it for common problems that many people have, and if the drug is used long term. But doctors in the early 90s knew better than to use opioids long term for problems like low back pain. We understood that if you give lots of your patients a highly addictive drug and prescribe it long term, many of your patients would get addicted. The campaign that was launched really was designed to get us to be more comfortable with opioids as a class of drug. What Purdue wanted when they were introducing OxyContin was a blockbuster drug. That's a drug that brings in more than $1 billion in sales a year. By their 5th year, they were bringing in more than $1 billion in sales on OxyContin.
They can't sell this drug without going through the doctors. They can't do it. And they spent all this money convincing doctors that their new time-release opioid was not dangerous, it was not addictive. Why did they do it? They did it to make money. And make money they did. They've done it, though, by writing prescriptions that were not needed. They were not needed. There's no way in Oklahoma that we can have 128 prescriptions for opioids for every 100 people. And yet that's exactly what the number is today.
Don't believe we would have an epidemic today had a multifaceted campaign not have been launched that deceived the medical community about the risks and benefits of these drugs.
On the next episode of Killing Pain.
We're all going to pay for the economic damages caused by the opioid epidemic.
It's permeating all facets of the criminal justice system.
So if you think this doesn't affect you, you really need to look at your bottom line and what's happening with your tax dollars, because you're paying for those negative consequences.
I find myself stealing to support the habit. Jump over the fence, jump in bed of the truck and take off with these drills in my hand. I remember sitting there in my jail cell. I said, I don't want to be like that.